In the wild landscape of Perthshire in Scotland lies the old estate of Dunira. All that remains of a once glorious garden are glimpses of elegant stonework and crumbling terraces reclaimed by nature. The ruins suggest days of grandeur and extravagance, but the decay is touched with a sense of tragedy. What secrets lie in these ghostly remains? It's early morning on the Dunira Estate. Within this intriguing mixture of dramatic countryside, moulded landscapes and crumbling formality is a lost garden we hope to restore.
These trees, how old would you say these oaks are?
Oh, they're not that old.
Right.
50, 60 years maybe.
But first, we must explore the grounds. Our garden historian, Dr. Toby Musgrave, is searching for clues in the terrain and planting that will help us to date the restoration. Anne-Marie Powell, our garden landscaper, will be in charge of coordinating the project.
It's got the air of something that was maintained, you know that?
Yeah.
That's nice though, isn't it? All the way down there.
So there's definitely something here. I mean, look at that Wellingtonia.
It's massive,
It's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah.
When were they introduced?
1853 they came into Britain, so
Base of that.
can only be 147 years old. And I know the first ones did come into Scotland.
But does it mean that there would have been a garden here from when that was planted?
I would imagine so, but I'd like to go and have a look around, see if there's any more evidence that we can sort of get a date from, any more trees.
I want to go up here because there's a stream and that's been landscaped, hasn't it?
Whilst Toby's off to identify more planting, Anne-Marie and I start to follow the stream.
That is very beautiful.
It's
but I don't believe
stunning.
that's man-made. I think it's been tinkered with, don't you?
I think it might have been actually.
I think it's lovely as it is. I wouldn't want to restore it.
No, I wouldn't either.
Well, this is clearly a man-made rockery, and I'm having a scramble round to see if there's anything about the planting that can tell us something about the date. This plant here, this is the umbrella pine, Sciadopodis verticillata. Came in 1853, the same date as the Wellingtonia. But it's a much smaller tree, but it's much more slow growing. So again, this is taking us back to the sort of late Victorian times, just looking at this. And also, at that time, it was a great fashion to collect conifers. So I'm starting to get a bit of a feel for a Victorian date, but let's see what else we can find.
Look at that though. That's where our garden proper is, isn't it?
Hey. Whoa. It's amazing. Look at that.
God, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different levels
And
of
there's
terracing.
some sort of water feature in there.
There's a fountain in the middle of that pond as well. Can you
All
see?
tying up with a house, as was. Which
That is vast, isn't
looks
it?
as though it's completely ruined.
This is it though, isn't it?
Well, that's our garden.
Definitely.
It's a bit daunting, I think.
A bit daunting is an understatement, Monty.
Let's check it out.
You've got a little bridge here.
Yeah.
Do you know, I think this is a rill.
Yeah, it's like a formalised stream,
Yeah, a
isn't
canal, stone on the edge, plants growing in the middle. And looking at that, I bet you that we're looking at, what, 1900 to 1920? I mean, Toby will put us right on that, I'm sure.
it? That stacked stone is a
Because
definite...
this is sort of Luchensy feel, isn't it?
It is.
And the rill gives it away, that sort of thing. And the stone looks relatively clean and modern. So why is it fallen to bits?
Well, I just don't think it's been looked after,
It's been
has it?
abandoned, hasn't it?
So we've found a wall fountain and a basin that leads to a rill, which is a narrow canal-like feature, which in turn leads onto a circular pond. We know that water rills were popular garden features in the early 1900s, but to pursue an exact date for the garden, our team of researchers have set up base in the remaining part of the old house. With access to county records, archive and books from the Royal Horticultural Society, we're ready to solve the mystery of this garden.
Well, from up here, you can see the point of the garden. View like this.
Makes
quite
sense.
stunning.
Yeah. So, what do you think, Toby?
Well, when I looked at the trees, I was thinking late Victorian, but as soon as I saw the rill, this changes the date to sort of early 20th century.
Yeah.
But I've got a bit of a hunch who it might have been, but I'm not going to say any more until I've done some more work.
So what about clearing?
I want to get the lads down here and start cracking on with it.
You
But-
happy with that?
I think if we do it carefully, I think that's the most important thing to do until we've got all the information we need.
Well, I was thinking about starting from that central rill there and just peeling back sideways to see what's underneath all of that modern day growth.
Sounds good.
So we gradually expose it. You're going to follow this hunch you've got, and I want to find out why. Why it was built, and why it was left to go into disrepair.
And I need to find out who did it and when.
So we've all got jobs to do.
We're all itching to uncover the stories behind this romantic overgrown site, but there are practical issues to be dealt with. It's a huge space, and Anne-Marie and the landscape team must produce a survey of the site to get precise measurements of the sunken area.
Alf, can you just move it slightly to the left?
What, your left or mine?
That way.
Your left. You happy with that?
Yeah. Move it just a touch. No, smile.
Smile.
In the database, we've results already.
I know that rills are a very popular Edwardian garden feature, so I went to have a look in a book called The Edwardian Garden by David Otwell, and hey presto, we've got a reference to Dunira. Its date is 1920, which is later than the Edwardian period. It was designed for a chap called W.G. Macbeth, and we have the name of the designer, Thomas Mawson. Now, Thomas Mawson was one of the top 3 designers of his day, so this guy was really going for the best. So, with that in mind, went and got a copy of Thomas Mawson's own book, The Art and Craft of Garden Making. This is the 5th edition from 1926. Here we have it. Here's our garden.
This elaborate plan shows that our sunken area is only a small part of Mawson's ambitious scheme to redesign the heart of the Dunira Estate, and the water features we found are the focal point of that design. We can clearly see the wall fountain, rill and pond, which is circled with a dramatic collar of crazy paving. Carefully excavating the features are volunteers from Elmwood College. Peeling back years of debris and growth soon yields exciting results. The rill is still edged with beautiful York stone flags. We're also finding clues as to what may have been planted here.
We're digging up quite a few of these irises. These are Iris pseudochorus. That's the big yellow one, the native flag iris, all the way along the rill. Now that does suggest that they might be part of the original planting. Tomorrow, Toby's going to check that up and see if there are any records to confirm that. But in the meantime, we'll store all these, collect them, and if they are needed, we'll use them and put them back in again.
We are gradually starting to uncover this lost garden, but we need to decide on the parameters of our restoration and what we can realistically achieve in our time here.
So what have we got?
This is a plan from a book by Thomas Mawson, the designer, and it's a huge garden. I mean, just look at the size of it.
Just stop there. It's not huge. It's enormous.
That's a better word.
It's totally mind-blowing.
I'm panicking a bit about exactly which bits we're going to try and cover and complete in this week we've got here.
Well, I'd like to do this area here with our circular pool, our rill and our beds, and maybe come up and do the semicircular.
So that's that terrace there?
Yeah, so we've got an approach,
Okay.
you come down, we've got the approach, then our compartment here. I mean, there's absolutely no way we can put back half an estate in a week. I mean, there's this whole chunk here that...
So underneath that field, down there is this enormously ornate garden.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm just wondering whether this is a proposal. This was what he put to the guy and said, well, this is what I'd like to do. I mean, I think we need to go and look and see if that's there. I mean, if it is there, we're not going to be able to do it all.
So who was this man Macbeth?
Well, he's the guy who owned the house.
And what year was this again?
1920.
So we know that Macbeth lived here in 1920,
1920.
so that's what I've got to get going.
I'm happy that you found this because I can scale this up and actually use this as a format. You know, it's a plan.
There you are, you see? On a plate.
So, the parameters of the restoration are set. We'll focus on the sunken garden at the heart of Macbeth's estate. we will restore the half-moon terrace, the wall fountain and basin, the water rill, pond and fountain, and detail crazy paving. We'll recreate intricate symmetrical flower beds, and finally we will rebuild the gravel paths that edge the garden. The bones of the garden may still be here, but there is still a lot of repair work to do. The whole of the sunken area has subsided into boggy earth and needs to be levelled in order to create beds for planting. The framework of the water rill has survived, but will need to be completely stripped down, repaired and resealed if it's to work again. We're starting to bring Mr. Macbeth's garden back to life. However, some parts of the plan are still puzzling me.
I've been walking around with this plan and I couldn't get it to work. I couldn't get the proportion right. So I paced from the top step back to the building. And it's miles. On the plan, it's just a short distance, which meant that everything else was out. But now I realise what's happened is that the building covered the whole of this area and came right up to where we are now. So that if Macbeth came upstairs, he would have stood almost exactly where the scaffolding is and looked out to his estate. But it's 1920. Well, 1920 was just after the end of the war. And I think that's the clue. That's what I want to find out. That what prompted this man to invest so much money into such a splendid garden at that stage in history.
Yesterday went really, really well. I was really pleased about how the progress went. But I'm still aware that we only just started to clear back. Today we've got to start putting this garden back in again, and there's lots to be done. The rill is all being cleared of all the debris that's built up, but we need a very clean surface to actually key our render to. Then we can start thinking about making it watertight. We've started to strip off the turf. We know that the plan had some intricate flower beds there, so we need to make sure that we've got a good surface to actually get those into. And we've got to get these water systems working again. And that sounds quite easy, but believe me, it's not. It's not like it's a new garden. It's a very, very old one. So all the pipes are blocked. They may well not fill as they used to do, and I've got to sort it out. So when we actually get that fountain going at the end of this week, I'm going to be really, really chuffed.
I've come in here to chase Mr. Macbeth, and I'm doing well because I've got an obituary of what seems to be his father, George Macbeth, who was a ship owner and died in 1919. He's left the estate of Dunira in Perthshire to his only son on the occasion of his marriage a few months before he died. And he's done the classic thing that all industrialists did in the 19th century. They made money and they wanted to buy land. And best land of all was an estate. And you either live in it yourself or you hand it on to your survivors so they can live as landed gentry. And that was the driving factor of accumulating all this wealth. And the wealth we've got down to the nearest pound. It turns out that he left £880,333, 16 shillings and 9pence, which in modern day terms is £20 million, 740,645. A lot of dosh. So, what do you do when you inherit 21 million quid and a Scottish estate? You hire a garden designer and tart it up. You change it. It's a new toy. That's why you had the garden made.
Well, you know, I got you the plan yesterday. Now I've got you some pictures that add more detail to the garden.
These are phenomenal. This is just what I need. This just shows you where everything goes and just what it looked like.
Absolutely. All the beds, the water feature, the terraces. The one thing that I find a little bit sad, though...
Look at that.
Yeah.
Balustrading all the way along the top of the terrace there.
And where's it gone? It's not here anymore.
Where's it gone?
Well, big question. I think it's something we need to find out.
The missing balustrading poses the first major problem for the restoration. To replace this amount of ornate stonework may cost tens of thousands of pounds, but if we don't replace it, we won't have a fully restored garden. However, these photographs do reveal to us the true scale and splendour of Mawson's vision. such a manicured garden set in the wild landscape of Dunira would have required exhaustive upkeep and maintenance. After lunch, our first visitor to the site is Davy McFarlane, who worked here as a gardener in the 1930s. His knowledge of the garden may give us more clues as to what was planted here.
I was 9 years in the garden before I left. I served my apprenticeship here.
You obviously can remember this bit that we're trying to restore.
Yes, it was a lovely spot, this. It was all roses, and each side were in uniform, and there was standard roses, but mostly hybrid tea. Round the edge, there was a border right round both sides.
Inside the wall? Or?
Yes, inside the wall. Each side was built the same, and the beds were all cut out the same.
And the rill, how was that? Can you remember what that was like?
It was wonderful. Mostly blue and white, and yellow irises. It was a wonderful place. I've never seen anything equal it.
Really?
No. And I've been around many of the mansion houses. They're all pretty nice, but there was nothing to equal this garden.
It's been nearly 50 years since Davy has last seen this garden, and his memories are of an estate in its prime. As we suspected, William Macbeth spared no expense on maintaining his gardens, and he employed over 22 gardeners on the estate. Macbeth is fondly remembered for the magnitude of his generosity. He was deeply concerned with the welfare of his employees and the local community. He organised and funded many sporting and social events, including regular football, cricket and tennis tournaments. Davy has good memories of what life was like on the estate back in Macbeth's day.
We had all the sport that we could wish for, all free of charge. A 9-hole golf course, and we had cricket all summer and football in the winter. It was all employees on the estate, like a happy family, you know. And of course they all look forward to the dance, monthly dance, you know. It was like a get-together.
Did you ever go inside the house?
I used to go in there 2 or 3 times a week, changing the flowers, begonias and chrysanthemums and anything in pot that was brought from the garden along there.
What about Mr. Macbeth?
He was a nice guy. He was a good sport. And he loved meeting people in the cricket matches and that. He supplied the food and the drink. He paid everything. Oh, he was a great guy. He was a great lad.
By the end of the day, the landscapers have reset most of the York stone around the rill into a bed of mortar. But this is just stage 1 in rebuilding the water feature.
Right, Brian started to burn off all the moss and lichen on this rill with this Bunsen burner. That's the start of a process that I've had to invent in order for us to get this work done in time. Once that's a clean surface, we can render over the whole area, and once that's dry, we can start waterproofing. But it started to rain, and if it carries on, we're going to be put back hours or even days.
But this is Scotland in early spring, and the weather is by definition unpredictable. All we can do is hope that it doesn't get any worse.
Well, this is our first disaster. It's been raining all morning, and the lads have put up a temporary shelter, but to be honest, that's just to keep them dry. This rill is below ground level, and the ground's so wet it's just leaching water in and into the rill itself. So, although they're still managing to patch up some of the cracks, there's no way we can render onto this wet surface. They're so fed up they're not even eating their bacon butties.
Fed up or not, work must go on. The turf was ordered to arrive this morning, and even though it's tipping it down, it is still arriving. Or trying to. Inside the rill, the rendering continues, and although conditions are pretty terrible, the landscapers are determined not to be defeated by the rain. The team decide to try and dig out the mud along the access routes in order to get the turf into the garden.
I'll find all this turf for us. I keep smiling.
Well, I'm hoping that he doesn't get stuck. We've got two 2-metre beds, one on the left, one on the right. So I'm hoping that he can drop all of the turf, one at one side and one at the other, only it's not looking too good at the moment.
The solution is a bigger tractor for the turf, but we still have a forklift stuck in the mud. And now it will have to stay where it is. None of this can quell Anne-Marie's enthusiasm to get the water features working again.
This is the start of a really, really fancy garden, and it's all based around water. The system started up here, and the water came out through this guy's mouth, and it poured into this pool here. Now, we've managed to re-render it just about last night, but it's still not watertight. We need to wait for this render to go off, and then we can start waterproofing it with our G4 sealant. That's the theory.
By installing a pump into the stream and laying a pipe up to the wall fountain, water will be pumped out of the mouth of the gargoyle and into the basin below. From here, it will cascade down into the rill, which will fill to the top. An overflow pipe from the rill will gradually fill the pond at the bottom, where an ornate fountain will end the display.
Now, you would think that this was the full stop of this garden, but because it's a circle, it leads to everything else radiating out from it. And that's the clever bit. Mawson really led the eye to this, but then to the ha-ha and the stream behind it, and out to the wider landscape. Now that's really clever.
Mawson was a prolific landscape architect, working on commissions all over Britain and abroad. Amongst others, he designed a stunning rose garden for Queen Alexandra near Copenhagen. His career coincided with a huge boom in garden design, and he was an active member of the arts and craft movement. But it strikes me he used a stock library of garden features throughout his designs, and even these seem to have been copied from other garden designers. Lunchtime seems a good time to put my theories on Mawson to Toby.
Can I have some shepherd's pie, please?
He certainly took ideas from other people, and I think he sort of had almost like a stock book of things, features like, the rill, sunken rose gardens, sunken lily gardens, herbaceous borders, terracing. But that's why I say I don't think he's original, but what I say he was a good designer, because the way he arranged the house, the gardens, and actually created a garden, he was very good at doing that.
Hiya.
Hi, what would you like?
Couscous, I think. Yeah, please.
How are you doing?
Well, it's the same old thing, isn't it? Too much chat and not enough action.
And I think also what you have to realise about designers is that, it's the same today. You tend to give the client what they want. If you want to be successful...
Yeah, hang on. Macbeth said, I don't care what you do.
But there wasn't anything else around at the time.
Or nothing else in his head.
Or nothing else in his head.
Whatever we think of Mawson's design style, there is no doubt that the use of formal stonework framing the wild landscape is very effective here at the Dunira Garden. Which brings us back to the balustrading.
From the first time we walked into our garden, I knew that there was something missing there. I mean, there's great chunks of stone that have been ripped out of our wall. And I'm finding little bits of this balustrading all the way around this garden. There's a great sweep of it round this corner, and it just tantalises me that that's there, and where we're doing our garden, it's not. So I've been thinking about actually trying to move this over there. It'd be too expensive to replace, but I want to do it by the book, so I need to make some phone calls.
It's mid-afternoon and a break in the weather means the volunteers can start to strip the turf from the top terrace. The bad news is that it's so uneven that turf strippers aren't working. It'll all have to come up by hand. In the midst of all this, Anne-Marie is bargaining hard to move the balustrading.
Yeah, see, we don't have the luxury of that sort of time scale. I mean, we're here until Friday, and we're really pushing it tight.
Unfortunately, Scottish Heritage require at least 7 weeks to even consider moving the balustrading. There was also no trace of the original crazy paving around the pond, so the landscapers have made a start on the immense task of recreating it. The quote for replacement balustrade is nearly £25,000, which is way out of our budget. It's just sad it was ever allowed to be vandalised. With the team setting to work on the crazy paving and the rendering inside the water reel nearly complete, all we need tomorrow is an improvement in the weather.
Give us a hand on the steps.
Okay.
Okay. Lovely job. Thank you very much.
Overnight it's been mild and windy. The ground is dry enough to start laying the turf. The volunteers from Elmwood College have little previous experience of turf laying, but by the time they finish this lot, they'll all be experts.
The weather yesterday really set us back. And what we've got to do today is get back to the earth. Deal with the fundamentals of what makes a garden. We've got as many people as possible working, and by tonight, we've got to be back to where we should be. And one of the things that I always think of when you get a situation like this, where you're really trying to wrestle with the soil and the stone, is that gardens are always attributed to somebody. Thomas Mawson made this garden. Well, I tell you, he didn't. The people that made this garden were the people like this lot who work week in, week out, digging and barrowing and turning this landscape into a wonderful garden.
There's about 200 square metres of paving here, and that's tons of it. So it'd usually take, what, about 4 men, 3.5 days. We started this last night, so that gives us about 2. So we've got to get every man available on this job.
36 tons of York stone are broken up into pieces and then assembled like a giant jigsaw puzzle, with the outer edges describing a perfect circle. We must also prepare the soil for beds in the sunken garden. It has to be rotivated thoroughly to break up any roots and then rake smooth. This area is over 500 square metres, and that's a lot of rotivating.
I'm using this photograph along with Mawson's original plan to not only lay out the beds, but to decide what's going to go in the beds. You can see from the picture that we've got the rill down the middle, which has got the irises. It's underneath the tent at the moment. We're drying it out and waterproofing it. And either side, we've got these series of rose beds, and these are quite intricate in design. And around the pool, we're laying the paving, and that's going to have another load of rose beds. And up on the upper terrace, where they're laying the turf as we speak now, we've got another series of beds, and also these domes of box, and they're going to be going back in. But what we don't know at this stage is exactly which roses were grown. We looked at Mawson's book, and he suggests a whole load of roses that would be appropriate, but most of these aren't available anymore. So what I've done is I've put a call into Peter Beales, one of Britain's leading rose experts, and he's been phenomenally helpful. He has not only produced a list of what was available in 1920, but he's helped out by suggesting which plants should go in which beds. So that's the next stage, to produce the plan that we're going to plant from.
First off, we have to create the beds by cutting Mawson's complicated designs out of the turf. It's a real exercise in geometry to get the beds symmetrical and perfectly shaped on both sides of the garden. Down in the sunken area, we still have to return the soil to a quality suitable for turf laying. First, it must be painstakingly levelled out, and then raked to a fine tilth. The scale of our garden is immense, and everybody on site is rising to the challenge, but our resources are limited. We only have a week here, so it's time to take stock of the situation.
So what have we got to do?
Loads. I mean, there's 2 paths going down each side of the garden there, just outside its boundaries, and they need to be edged, and then they need to have a gravel surfacing laid there. There's steps coming up to this terrace here. We haven't even started this terrace. We've got all the turf to go down in these 2 halves here, the beds to be cut out.
But, I mean, the good news is that under that black polythene, a lot of work's gone on, hasn't
Oh,
it?
God, loads of work's gone on under there. There's always been a little crew underneath all of that mound of stuff there. Not hiding it. I mean, they have been grafting down there as well. And loads has gone on. Yeah. Forgot to tell you about the fountain.
Oh, what's happening about that?
Well, the pipes haven't turned up yet. And neither have the pumps, and neither has the fountain.
It's very clear that we've still got a long way to go with this restoration, but we're still hopeful that tomorrow it will all come together. And I would still like to find out why the garden and house went into ruin. We still know very little about William Macbeth, and to find out more I took a walk with Gibbie the gamekeeper. He claims to know a thing or two about the old laird, and he also knows where to find some deer.
You have to stalk through very quietly and keep your ears and your eyes open all the time.
What's that?
I asked Gibbie what it must have been like to be a keeper under Macbeth.
You just kind of live, hope to live nowadays as Macbeth lived way back. Estates are running on 2 or 3 men, whereas they reckoned there was 22 gardeners on here at one time. Well, I'd say 22 gardeners, 4 or 5 keepers, all the foresters, sawmillers, all these people. It was like a community on its own, maybe 30, 40 people in that one wee area. It's totally self-sufficient. They didn't need anybody else.
What difference do you think it made if you had a laird who was benevolent?
If you had a laird who was really dedicated to his estate, it made an awful difference. They got the basic pay, but the perks was the big thing. Like as the keepers, they would get venison as part of their deal. They had their house and they had their coal. Macbeth was meant to be one of the really good or the better lairds of the day. He made sure everybody was well looked after, and I think that was maybe his problem at the end of the day.
Could it be that Macbeth's wealth and generosity were his downfall?
So let's get this plastic off. For the last few days, this has been covered up due to the bad weather, but there has been a gang under there almost constantly, and they've managed to get the stones back level. They've stripped out all the spoil, re-rendered it, and waterproofed it 3 times using G4. But now, it's time for the grand unveiling. We can see what they've been up to.
We've got a lovely morning at the start of our last day, and everybody's responding by working really hard. But the truth is we're probably just not going to get it done tonight because we're 24 hours behind ourselves and there's nothing we can do to get that time back. But it doesn't matter because we're not trying to achieve some sort of artificial deadline. All we're trying to do is get this project set up and get it going so in the future, maybe over years, this can be returned to its former glory.
The volunteers from the Elmwood College are perfecting the art of turf laying. The sunken garden area needs over 500 square metres of turf that has to be cut out symmetrically. Thankfully, they seem to be in complete control of the job.
Right, okay, here's the deal. Long-headed rakes followed by a short-headed rake. We take the rubbish to one side, we'll scribe it out, and then we'll start laying the turf. You'll steal some of the boards off our side as well later on. Okay? On you go.
One question that we haven't really answered yet is what happened to the rest of Mawson's design that should extend out to the field in the distance? All the photographic evidence suggests that it was never created, and Toby has his own theories.
Well, we know from the design in Mawson's book that the whole of this area down here should have been this very elaborate, formal garden. We also know that it wasn't built. The reason why it wasn't built still is a mystery. It certainly wasn't a lack of cash. Macbeth was awash with the stuff. So I've got a couple of theories. Maybe it was Mrs. Macbeth who said, right, enough. I've had enough of roses. All right up there, but not down here. Or maybe Macbeth himself just loved the view so much and his Highland cattle in the background, he just said, right, let's just leave it as it is and enjoy the natural landscape.
It's easy to see why William Macbeth, surrounded by such natural beauty in these Scottish hillsides, with his top-of-the-range Mawson garden, must have been extremely content in this country seat. Photographs from the 20s also show that there was a clear view from the garden into the distance, and now a silver birch has self-seeded itself right in the centre of that view. So, out it must come. One of the country's foremost experts on roses is Peter Beales. He has arrived with a planting plan and roses to start filling the beds.
What was the logic behind them?
What I did was pick roses that would have been contemporary to the period, but of course they wouldn't have just used the new roses of the day. They would have used roses from catalogues that they would have browsed through, and Mawson undoubtedly had his own taste, and he's applied it to this particular garden. And as I looked at it in its original state, I could see that it was clearly hark back to the Victorian period when they used roses extensively.
We're seeing nothing else but roses in the beds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to our eye, that's quite sort of bare, brutal planting at times.
Yes.
And they wouldn't have bothered about that.
No, because they were concerned with what the effect was going to be in the high summer when they were here having their parties and so on.
I'll start digging this. The soil here isn't brilliant.
No, I can tell. It's very heavy, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, does that matter?
No, roses love heavy soil.
OK, Peter, I'm going to put a little bit of planting compost in there.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And this is a bare root plant, isn't it?
Yes, it's getting towards the end of the season for bare root plants, but still quite a good time to plant roses.
OK, so we put that in there like that, nice and deep.
I'll hold it up for you if you like.
OK. Now, do you leave it like that?
No, I don't. No, I need to get it pruned down hard now, because we're trying to lay the foundations for the bush in the future.
OK.
And in order to do that, we need to take out this little bit of thin wood here, which is never going to produce anything of substance. And we're left with 4 shoots, prune them down to that level.
By pruning that hard, what exactly are you achieving?
We're laying the foundation for the future well-being of the rose.
So, with the turf cut into beds, the soil is prepared, and it's all hands on deck to get the roses planted. With over 800 roses, taken from a collection of 30 period-correct varieties, the rose garden promises to be stunning. Although, with such hard cutting back needed to achieve healthy plants in the future, we may not see much colour from them this year. The rose garden will need a lot of maintenance, and the responsibility of looking after it falls with the current owner of the Dunira Estate, Geordie Gould.
It's the hardest work I've done for many a month, I have to say. It's very satisfying, though. It's just fantastic to think how much they've all achieved in the last few days. But I think what it'll encourage us to do is to carry on with the restoration of the remainder of this garden. But I think we are going to be fairly careful about the way we proceed, and we'd like to be able to maintain it for the future. And so it'll have to be done in a really rather different way, of course, to how they conceived the garden to start with. And then we'll see how we go from there.
The landscape team have achieved the enormous task of rebuilding the crazy paving. 3 men have worked non-stop for 2 days to restore this paving, and now just the finishing touches of sand and cement between the stone need to be added. Alf the landscaper is still trying hard to pump the water into the basin and rill.
Well, basically we pulled a trench from the lion's head right the way around, and we're going to follow it right down to the end of the garden, put this cable pipe in, and hopefully that's going to pump the water up from the stream back into the lion's head and hopefully get it working all again. And that's basically it, and all we're going to do afterwards is just gravel it and just cover it up as if we've never been here. So fingers crossed it's going to work. You never know. Such is the life of gardening. And I'm off now.
The top terrace now has a lawn and gravel pathway and will shortly be planted with annuals.
Where I'm standing right now in a moment is going to be a cascade of water. The pool's filling up and it's going to flow down here. And this is actually quite an unusual rill, because in Edwardian times it was typical just to have a little trickle coming through. But this, the water level is going to come up here a couple of feet. And these stone retainers are our secret weapon, because these are the Irish planting pockets. We're going to fill them with soil and then plant them with 4 types of iris. We've got blue, white and yellow irises that are going to look lovely in summer. And what will happen is they'll grow up, the water will keep them wet, but the pockets will stop the soil from being washed away, so the water will still be clear as it flows through. It's going to look lovely.
The first trickle of water from the basin means that soon we'll be able to plant the iris rill. By late afternoon, the finishing touches to William Macbeth's formal sunken rose garden are being put into place. The restoration is nearly complete. But there is one missing piece to the jigsaw puzzle. The mystery of why this magnificent garden and house ever came to ruin is still unknown. We were joined by Joanna Goddard, who is William Macbeth's granddaughter. Family stories of the Macbeths have been passed down to her, and she can recall his reputation.
He was obviously a very generous chap, and he was always giving money away to everybody. And I know in the Depression, when work was very scarce, he actually said that anybody who wanted a job could come and be employed. They'd find something for them to do on the estate.
William Macbeth married Winifred in 1918, and together they had 2 daughters. Winifred was expecting her 3rd child, and Macbeth was hoping for a son and heir to Dunira.
Something dreadful went wrong, although they had all the doctors here, and the baby, although the baby was perfect, the baby was born dead.
The loss of their only son was to leave the Macbeth household in shock.
And my grandmother was very ill. In fact, they talked about her being in a coma for 2 years. And gradually, you know, she came out of it. But I don't think she was ever the person she was before. Her health was definitely broken. But my grandfather, I know, was very devastated by this. He had it fixed in his mind that this baby was going to be a boy, and he'd gone to the extent of having bonfires lit on the corners of the estate, which he was going to light when the son was born. He went and took the baby. That night he was told that his wife might not survive, and so he went in and he took the baby and he disappeared. And apparently he went and had it buried in their family vault because he wanted to have a son. He was absolutely devastated.
William Macbeth could find no sanctuary from disaster. On the night of the 22nd of December 1947, the Monday before Christmas, the house caught fire. It burnt for a full week and nothing could be done.
They were lifting the beds out of the house onto the lawn through the French windows, and the beds were all going on fire. A waste of time.
That was the end of everything. my grandfather came up and watched it burn down. It was just terrible. He died very shortly afterwards. My grandmother wouldn't come back and see it. I remember once she came with us, we were going through to St. Fillan's, and she definitely turned and looked the other way. She didn't stop and look. You know, she just couldn't bear to come and look at it. Because it was just this ruin, you know, and it looked so derelict and sad.
There was no chance of the house being rebuilt and of the estate being reclaimed. The gardens became unloved and grew away. And although other people owned the estate, the heart and the soul was gone. Where once there lay a lost garden, steeped in the melancholy of family tragedy, there is now once more a Thomas Mawson garden that lies like a jewel in the grounds of the Dunira Estate. The idealism of the designer that moulded nature and garden architecture seamlessly into the beauty of the Scottish landscape can be experienced once again. In Thomas Mawson, William Macbeth had found a designer whose craftsmanship and vision could fully interpret the splendour of Dunira. Dunira's formal rose gardens are starting to bloom and will, in future years, provide a tapestry of colour and perfume. The Emily Grey standard roses are starting to flower and symbolise to me the future success of this garden. The centrepiece of the garden is undoubtedly the iris rill. The cascading water feature gradually settles into a tranquil flow, all surrounded by the vibrant yellow Iris pseudochorus. This historical garden has been reborn, and Dunira is now a window to the past, and with it, the atmosphere and spirit of the estate has been transformed.